Hi, I'm Rebecca Mander, and you are listening to the Bounce Mindset podcast. During my time as a busy mum and managing director in 2007, I managed significant personal loss and professional challenges as the only woman on the board. I believe we always have a choice, and that a resilient and what I call a bounce mindset is possible for anyone to develop. Join me as we meet some incredible guests, sharing their bounce forward stories, including my own in episode 1. I'm so excited to have you here, and also would like to thank Grow Radio Production and Stephen Bedell for Dragonfly, my very own theme tune. Enjoy. Hi there, I'm joined today by Tier Blundell. I first heard Tier speak on Radio 4 with Dr. Sian Williams as part of her life-changing series. I was on my way that day to deliver our Bounce Mindset program, and I was listening to the morning news and I was so miserable. I just thought, what is going on in the world? And I thought, how am I going to inspire an audience and motivate an audience? And then Tier came on. And oh my goodness, boom, that energy was completely shifted. Job done. I heard a story that is the definition of resilience, determination, and growth. From a young age, Tier experienced rejection and racism and fought metaphorically and literally to bounce forward. And this fighting would lead to some of the best and the worst times of his life, up until the age of 26. When Tier experienced his bounce moment, the choice that would change his life. So I'm so excited to be here, to be joined by Tier, live from Australia, aren't you, Tier?
Yes, I currently am. Yeah, I don't usually reside here, but I'm on holiday. It's really good.
And we're really interested to hear your story, and I know that our listeners are going to be so inspired. So just really that racism and that rejection that I mentioned in my introduction, you experienced that from day one, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So, and of course, initially it would have been, I guess, in more unconscious ways. I mean, I was born to my mother, who was white British, and my father was Pakistani. And initially it came from, my father, couldn't or chose not to have a relationship with me because there was a cultural taboo over the fact that he'd had a child with my mother who was white, but also out of wedlock. I find that the wedlock thing is kind of less important because he would never have been able to get married to her anyway culturally. So it's kind of a moot point, the wedlock. So, and again, I'm not going to say that's Pakistani culture 100%. I certainly don't think that's Islamic culture, but for the particular iteration of what my kind of family followed, it was never going to happen. And so, I didn't have a father, and that clearly affected my mother. And, as I grew up, I experienced lots of things that would affect me as a child. So, my mum, by her own admission later in life, didn't connect with me. So she struggled to hug me and embrace me, until I was 14 years old by her own admission. And so there was that going on. And then there was the kind of the absence of my father that was ever present for me, and the knowledge that it was because of racial reasons. And then increasingly in my community, which I grew up in Northampton on a council estate, and it was a very kind of white area. And, I would often be called a Paki and be racially abused. And then this also morphed into my own family home as well, when, my mother married a man who was racist. There's no other way to describe it. He was, clearly racist. And it just led to this environment of me feeling, I think, unsafe, unwanted, and unsure what I was ever going to do, what the purpose was going to be. And yeah, just kind of living in a bit of sort of danger mode, and that definitely moderated my behavior and then affected me in different ways, which then would lead to misbehavior on my part. And, eventually, school exclusions and then permanent exclusion. And then mixed in with that. And again, I don't know if this was there before, which is entirely possible, or whether it was something that I developed in this environment, but I developed ADHD. And so the ADHD, on top of the difficulties around the behavior that I was living around, meant that, and a lot of that was abuse as well, meant that I was really acting up and really unable to kind of function, particularly in a class environment.
Yeah, so you felt unsafe at home.
Yeah.
And yeah, you'd go to your room and stay in there, I guess, to feel safe.
I was always hanging around with older lads. Obviously, I'd get into trouble as well, and they'd put me up to things. But I would either go out for a very long time. I remember, once upon a time, when it would get dark in the evenings, we'd buy an luminous football so we could keep playing when the street lights went out. I mean, it was, you wouldn't do it anymore. Most parents, wouldn't do it. But back then, you got away with it a little bit more. And in the summer holidays, I'd have a key and I'd just go out and play. Or yeah, later on, I think when we moved, yeah, I would spend a lot of time in my room playing video games, and yeah, keeping out of the way, because it was risky. Because even when I used to go out and play with lots of like friends, it wouldn't take long for an argument to happen or something, and then they'd just switch, and then they'd start calling me a backy. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was like, oh, you never really know who your friend is, because I
Mm.
think it's important to say that, for me, when I was called that, it hit me in a very unique way that I couldn't quite articulate or understand, because I was mixed race, but I kind of virulently didn't want to identify as Pakistani. And so it had only ever been presented to me as an insult. So so when somebody said it to me, I had
Yes.
a reaction to it,
Mm-hmm.
and I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't happy. But it also hurt because I knew that this was something that had almost happened to me. And my father was Pakistani, but he didn't want anything to do with me. And that hurt because I always wanted to have something to do with my dad. And so, yeah, it was a deeply cutting slur, and as I'm sure it is for absolutely everybody who receives it, even if they're in a
Yes.
happy Pakistani family. But, for me, I really couldn't quite make sense of it. And so
Yes.
that meant I would lash out.
Yes.
That was my response.
So not accepted in your home life, even when you found your comrades outside, you know, telling me that story about the football, it was almost sounded quite romantic. And then all of a sudden there's that, if it goes wrong, it comes back to that slur and that treatment. So negative. And so not really, you couldn't be assured that you'd be accepted by your friends at home. In the classroom, did you feel accepted at school?
No, absolutely not. I think, I was very engaged. So, I mean, if we go back to primary school,
Mm.
I was very interested in learning, but clearly, I think because of the ADHD, I couldn't do it in the way that I now know, having had
Mm-hmm.
got experience as a teaching assistant, and having actually taught in some primary schools. I know now that, I didn't fit the easiest, bill for a teacher. So I know that I'll shout out. I struggle with that. I did struggle with putting my hand up. I think I put my hand up and then also said what I wanted to say. So I struggled with these things. And obviously it was called then hyperactivity. That's how they termed it for me. So but I was engaged and I did love to learn. I was interested in things. I was interested in different subjects, and I'd get very kind of, I mean, a classic ADHD example, I'd get hyper focused on certain issues. So, I remember watching The Mummy, I think it's like 1999, and I was really into ancient Egyptians, and I wanted to do everything about ancient Egyptians. And I mean, to the credit of the primary school, I think they realized this. And then after a while, they kind of would make a desk in the classroom and allow me to kind of really attack something like the ancient Egyptians. And another one was the Amazonian rainforest. And then I could really do that. And then I'd be focused and I'd be learning and I'd be engaging. But up until that point, honestly, it was just a whirlwind of exclusions, suspensions, and internal exclusions. And there was a real moment for me when, and I remember it, and it's a bit of a blur, but it's kind of one of my saddest memories because I really wish that I knew who this person was. But there was a woman in primary school, and I imagine she must have just been on placement or something, and she was kind of shadowing me, and I was out of class, and I remember something of a conversation with her that went along the lines of, "I can't read my own name." And she was shocked by that. And this was when I was in year four. I remember that clearly. And she taught me how to read by taking me into the classes. And I remember it's burnt into my brain, sort of TH is th. And I hadn't learnt that. Somehow I had not learnt that. And so she taught me the sounds. And then I learnt to read in a week. And the first book I ever read was on cholera in Victorian Britain. And the second book was about the escape of Alcatraz. And the third book was about Amelia Earhart's flight over the Atlantic. And
Wow.
I didn't even go for the Biff, Chip, and Kipper. I just got it like that. And I just read. And that saved me in so many ways. Because I often think if that woman hadn't have taken that time out, what would have become of me if I'd have not been able to read, and I got permanently excluded? We can come on to that later, but the self-study that kept me going, without
Yes.
that, I don't know what I would have done. And so, moments like that are really important because I know now, I was speaking to somebody at the Shannon Trust recently, there's so many people in prison excluded from school that cannot read.
Mhm.
So I really count that as such a lucky moment for me that somebody actually took the time to kind of one-on-one show me what I needed to be shown rather than being removed from class. I wrote recently in one of my newsletters a little bit about my internal exclusions, which are a phenomenon that happen quite regularly now, and they're on the rise actually. And I think people see it as some kind of happy alternative to removing them from school. But I sat in a room, I'll never forget it. It was the Sullivan room, they called it. And it was simply a room behind the reception. And there was kind of two brown desks back to back, one grey chair and some filing cabinets and a really old clock on the wall. And it's probably one of the worst experiences of my life because I would be often put in there for a whole school week and I would sort of get led there in the morning. And the only time I would ever leave is to go to the toilet. And if I had to ask somebody to go to the toilet, they'd be visibly annoyed. And out the window was where people would play. When it was, playtime, I would not get playtime. I wouldn't go to the cafeteria for lunch. None of that. I would sit there, just this forgotten child. And I couldn't read to start with. I couldn't read, so I couldn't do any work. So I used to play with pencils and imagine they were submarines. And I used to play these kind of war games with them. And I used to look at the clock and I used to try and make deals with God that the time would move forward. That's all I did all day. And I read an article recently about how time moves slower for children. And it almost vindicated me because it felt, when I think about the longest period of my life, I think about moments in that room because it was just so mind-numbingly boring. And I was just left there and I would appeal to leave. I would appeal to go back to class. And I don't remember a single opportunity being given me. And it felt like sometimes I was just there for weeks. So
Gosh.
really
I mean,
challenging. And yeah, go on.
no, it's just so I'm conscious that we're being videoed as well on my face. I'm just horrified. So sad. And, solitary confinement is the worst form of imprisonment because we need that human interaction. And you were basically being treated like an animal. That doesn't happen these days, does it?
It does happen. I mean,
Oh,
okay,
God.
I'm not going to say it happens in the same way that it happened to me. I mean, we're talking about the mid 90s, mid to late 90s, and I can't speak for every school,
Mm,
but, yeah, internal exclusions absolutely happen. And there's got to be some thinking done around internal exclusions. It can't just be for convenience, get this child out
mm,
of the way.
mm-hmm.
There's got to be some re-engagement. And most importantly, there has to be a path back to the classroom. There has
Yes.
to be a path back to the classroom. I think that was something that really affected me. It might be that,
Mm,
okay, I've done something the day before. Okay, something's happened. And it's, for me, probably something happened at home, something
mm.
happened in the morning or didn't happen in the morning. And then I've gone to school and, and something's happened. I've slipped up, I've been taken out. And now I'm spending a week in internal exclusion.
And I remember that heartbreaking story of you actually voicing that you were going to try and get Star of the Week. You were going to work
Mm.
really hard to get Star of the Week. And you did everything you could possibly do in that week. And you didn't get Star of the Week, did you?
So yeah, I often put myself on a path where I wanted to kind of, turn over a new leaf was the saying.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I was, particularly criminally minded or anything, but, I wanted to try and fit what everybody else wanted me to be. So I
Yeah.
wanted to sit down and do what they wanted to be. And, a lot of the time when I couldn't manage that, I remember I would sit outside the head teacher's office or wherever I was, and I'd be really confused. I'd be almost having a borderline panic attack because I couldn't understand where I'd gone wrong. It was unfair, and the part of that was racism. But sometimes, I'd interrupted or been disruptive, and that was fair enough. But, there weren't many second chances. Now, I'd really made, this commitment, and I'd spoken to the teacher and I'd said, I really want to win this. I really want to go for this. I'm going to try my hardest. I'm going to do my best. And all I can remember in that week, and I can remember so much, is that it was the only thing on my mind. It was the only thing on my mind, everything, not a single thing gone wrong. I was trying to be the model student, put my hand up, not talking. Everything was there. And then, yeah, and then when it came to that announcement, I remember it. And I remember it being a kind of zoom out film moment where, yeah, I thought I would get it. But I think the thing that shocked me the most was the person who did get it. And, you never heard anything from him. Maybe he was an unsung hero and he deserved his own award. But it seemed to me that, he didn't have, from what I could tell, any reason, to win it kind of over me, who I'd really tried hard. And I think what it would have given me is it would have given me something that I needed, which was, hey, look, if you do take this route, it will actually benefit you. It will actually serve you. And that was what I was hoping for. I was hoping for that kind of recognition and that kind of, because I'd never got that in school. I wasn't really
Mm.
getting that. And I certainly wasn't getting it at home. And I definitely wasn't getting it in my community. So here I was trying to build a relationship with my school and with my teacher through this kind of short-term accreditation for my behavior. I think I needed something tangible to prove to me that I could
Yes.
do it. And they went, no, and they gave it to, in my judgment, the archetypal good boy. And so I think from that was a real turning point in my school experience. And as I think I said on the radio, my immediate reaction was revenge, crime. And that became a bit of a running theme, actually, if I'm honest, for my life in different ways. Because I thought I just couldn't be a victim to this.
Mhm.
There was something within me that just couldn't be a victim to this. And I don't condone my behavior, but there was just something within me that it felt like that was too catastrophic to countenance. I had to do something. I had to get something back. And so that was why I then stole off that child to try and get something back because I felt like he'd taken something from me.
So we talk about the victim to victor, moves that we make, and we often talk about that in quite a heroic way. I'm not going to be the victim, I'm going to be the victor of my
Mm,
destiny. And there were survival techniques that you had in order to do that, refusing to be the victim. And we'll come on later. I'd love to understand where we think that came from, because it certainly didn't come from your
mm.
parents or anyone showing you deserved to be the victor, but you had that innate belief that you didn't want to be the victim. And your survival techniques were, some would say, quite questionable, and got you
Yeah.
into trouble, into that, in being that year six, if we could go to the year six boy, Tia, taken into an office to be told actually what those survival techniques had done.
Yeah, so obviously I get called in towards the end of summer and my mum is brought in and yeah, it's a bit of a blurry memory, but I remember my head being quite low for most of it. And the message that I remember audibly and very clear was that, you're not welcome back in the summer. And then it was the conversation around there's this other school and so on. And I remember that it just felt like the air from me and my mum was like just defeat. It was just defeat. We were just being led to the gallows, really. That was there was no opposition, and actually that's a big deal because there was a lot of opposition in me generally. I was always speaking up for a sense of injustice. I had a big sense of injustice. I was always arguing. The only kind of positive thing teachers ever predicted about my future was, you should be an MP or a barrister because you've always got an answer for something. But that was usually in my, it was usually a point to like, say I was complaining too much or something like that,
Backhanded compliment.
rather than wow, you should lead the country, Tia, you
Mm.
know. But so I would normally advocate for myself and talk about that. And there's lots of examples about that. And I have to give my mum credit. You know, there was one time which kind of paints a picture of that school, and it was one of the meetings that led to, again, we're talking about not being a victim. I think this is important. I remember I was in a line queuing up for PE, and this one lad just decided to randomly, come up to me and start saying horrible things about my mum. And I was like, oh, whatever, let it go. And then he carried on out on the pitch, and he then racially abused me as well. And I'd had enough at this point, so I beat him repeatedly with a hockey stick. Now, when I got pulled in and my mum got pulled in, and it was all how atrocious my behavior was, I did point out to my mum that, he had said those things, and that I told the teacher, and they didn't do anything. And then he was racist to me on the pitch, and nothing, even though I'd hit him and I had to answer for that, nothing had come back on him being racist. And he was heard, he was audibly heard by teachers and the other young people in the thing, and they did nothing about it. And my mum said, well, what are you doing about that? My son's being racially abused. And they all looked shocked. I do remember that. They just sort of looked like, well, and that was a running theme. If ever somebody was racist to me and I lashed out at them, I always used to get told sticks and stones. But it wasn't
Mhm.
sticks and stones, because I've already explained it meant so much more to me. It was, it's not sticks and stones, but it's my entire life, my entire family unit is taken from underneath me. I live a life on sand in fear because of this issue, this racial issue.
Yes.
And so when people are weaponizing that against me, it's a little bit more than, I know, calling me ugly.
Absolutely. Eventually enough sticks and stones actually, if there's enough of them, they do break your bones.
Yeah.
And that was what was happening for you. And that, conscious and unconscious racism coming from teachers as well. I'm guessing the boy that got Star of the Week wasn't from an ethnic minority background.
No,
You know.
absolutely not. And, and that did happen where I was. I was known as the colored kid. So, or the, sorry, or the half caste kid. And, and so people, you would hear rumors and gossip. And so some young people would tell tales. If something happened, they would say it was the colored kid, it was the half caste kid, or it was Tier, because there was only one Tier. And it was just believed. So there's another thing that happened to me that I really actually like your perspective on, because I asked to go to the toilet once. This was before I was excluded. So about year six. And I went to the toilet, and as I go walk in, people are coming out and they're laughing, these kids. And I just go in, and then I finish using the toilet. And as I go to leave my cubicle, teachers come in and start rounding on me and say, you've done this, that thing that kids do with paper towels. And they're like, I've
Yeah.
never actually done that to this day. I think it's silly. They throw the paper towels on the ceiling, whatever. And I said, I didn't do that. I've just come to the toilet. And they went, yes, you have. So they hauled me in front of whomever, the head teacher. And I had a behavior worker at that time. And I did like her. And I said to her, I didn't do this. Honestly, I didn't do this. I'm telling you the truth. And my mum always said my son's not a liar. And that's the thing. I would always be honest. If I'd done something, I'd have a reason why I did it. I wouldn't do anything indiscriminately. I should not have done the thing. Don't get me
Mm-hmm.
wrong, but I'd have some sort of reason. I wouldn't just say I haven't done it. So she actually, she didn't believe me. Nobody believed me. So they put me on a 2 week long detention after school helping the cleaners. So now we come back to this victim thing. So I thought to myself, right, I've been the victim here of a not mistaken identity. They've blamed me and I haven't done it, right? I know I haven't done it. They're not listening to me. So I'm gonna get something back here. So then I stole all the sweets that teachers would have in their cupboards to give to kids or whatever. And
Pineapple
then
cubes.
yeah, things like that in these jars. And then eventually this other young person that was put on this, he got caught, and then he sort of said, "Oh, Tier put me up to it," which I think might have been true. I think I let him in on my scheme. Fair enough. But this is the important thing. My behavior mentor, whomever this person was, I'll never forget. She sat down with me and she cried and she said, "You've let me down." And I thought to myself, in that moment, something really real happened to me. And I do reflect on how that may have shaped my life moving forward, and my relationships with women too, based on some of my impactful relationships with teachers at primary school and sort of secondary school. But I remember the air going out of me because I was like, I remember saying, I told you in the first place, I didn't do it and you didn't listen. You let me down, you know? So these were the kind of things that were happening to me and that kind of emotional reaction I was getting, because I wasn't being listened to and I wasn't being heard. And then the actions that I did undertake to try and be heard and to try and, cope with this phenomenon of me being, falsely accused and so on, meant that, inevitably I was making them have these reactions and so on. And I was becoming the bad guy and I think that just really messed me up as a young person.
Yeah, well, it would. And then, you were taken to what you thought was a different school, but actually it was you describe it as a prison. It felt like prison, a pupil referral unit. And that sense of, I'm not going to be the victim. I want to stay and have some resemblance of respect. So I'm going to fight for that. And the fighting continued. And what was that experience like?
Well, I mean, it's funny because I reflect on how some of my, I guess, what we call offensive reactions to being a victim, where I would kind of go on the offensive and say, no, I'm going to take this, or no, I'm going to hit you because you've called me this. I mean, yes, that didn't serve me particularly systemically, because although in that one-to-one interaction, I might have got something back in the short term or managed to push back against my peer, but then teachers would kind of jump on me and so on, and and then that wouldn't ultimately serve me. But when I went to the pupil referral unit, it's almost a relief that I'd kind of exercised those muscles because, I went to a referral unit in Kettering and there was lots of young people there from Corby. And look, I had ADHD. I was the class clown, and I'd say at least 40% of the stuff I got accused of doing I hadn't done. The young people in this referral unit were very challenged. They had really difficult backgrounds. Some of them were in care. They didn't have parents. They lived with their grandmother. There was a lot of challenging issues in places like Corby. There was young people there that were taking drugs, sniffing glue. There was all sorts of problems there. And they had a whole level of difficulty that I didn't have. So when I went there, if I was picked on or I was racially abused, I learned very quickly, you got to fight back. Now, of course, I lost badly, but it got me respect. And so I often wasn't picked on again. So it served me in a way to have that reaction and to never accept it, to never just accept the bullying. I got a good hiding a couple of times, but overall, that kind of built respect. And then, playing football and so on and moving up the year groups again helped, and then that stopped. But it was a massive culture shock. And then that feeling of otherness as well. I mean, getting into a taxi and going to a whole different town to go to school and getting there and recognizing as I'm maturing as well. And I started doing a paper round at 12, and I used to really like reading the headlines. And I really used to really like the Independent back in the day. And I'd read the headlines and I was interested in world affairs and I wanted to learn. And this pupil referral unit, there was none of that. There was no learning. It was a few worksheets. Yeah, no like specialized teachers. It was all about containment. And I think that if we're honest, there's a truth still in that for a lot of alternative provision today, is it's about containment. And in my pupil referral unit, it was very much that. I mean, the fences were so high, the gates were, locked. You couldn't go through doors because they'd be locked behind you and so on and so forth. It was, and sometimes they would put you in a room that was like a holding room, and there'd be holes in the wall where youngsters have been punching the walls and so on. It was all about containment. There was no interest in your flourishing. And most importantly, there was no expectation of your flourishing.
And then later, you left with no GCSEs. Am I right?
Yeah, nothing. Yeah.
Nothing. And then you were using those skills that you'd learned fighting, and you became really successful in the world of MMA. I think you were a world champion. Am I right?
A world champion, but I was a British champion.
In my world, you are.
Yeah, that's great. I'm happy with that. Yeah. No, yeah. So I got into, well, I think that the important thing to just catch before that is that, yeah, I left at 16 with no qualifications, and I got a job in a supermarket, and
Yeah.
I was really depressed. One of the things that people would say to me at school is, "You've got low self-esteem. You've got low." Of course, I've got low self-esteem. Look at my life and
Yeah.
look at how you treat me.
Yeah.
And so when I left at 16 with no qualifications, we're talking about year 2007. So we're talking about the crunch. So
Mhm.
I left. I got my job in the supermarket, and I had no qualifications. Nothing was going on, and I wasn't in a good place. I lived on my own, and I just, you know, drank energy drinks and played video games. Really, low self-esteem, not
Mhm.
talking to anyone, no real social life. And then martial arts came in, where a friend of mine kind of, funnily enough, I always laugh because it was toxic masculinity that kind of got me into it in a weird way, because he just kept basically, calling me pathetic for not going. Not that word, but you can imagine. Calling me pathetic for not going and so
Mm.
on. And he kept doing it and kept doing it until eventually I went, no, I'll show you I'm not. And then I came and I got hooked. And that did change my life, because it gave me a learning environment where people respected me, but the underlying expectation, whereas there was no expectation of doing anything at the pupil referral unit, was that, if you work hard, what you can get out of this, what you put into it. And if you work hard, you could get to the UFC, you could be a world champion. And that was an expectation that everybody just held for each other. And so engaging with that, and engage coaches taking time out, showing you, giving you their time and attention, and being able to constructively criticize and so on, whilst also you're still allowed to be yourself as well, still allowed to put your own flavor on things, just meant that I could actually learn and expand my mind and learn this craft. And yeah, it just went really well. I started to win fights. I became an amateur champion quite quickly. And then I got to travel, which was amazing. I went to Thailand, trained in Thailand, fought in Thailand, and traveled and fought all around the world. And then that meant my old interest in cultures could come back. And
Oh,
I could,
wow.
like, when
Yeah.
I was there, I could learn about different cultures and
Yeah.
learn about their history. And so all this stuff was, firing off in my brain. So that, by the time, I then moved on, and kind of, as I was, one of the ways I funded my career was I worked on the doors as a bouncer,
Hmm.
and I was sort of working around university students. That was one of the things that led me to think, look, I want a little bit more, and I really want to engage. I think I can hang with these people, like in smoking areas, they'd come out, we'd have conversations. What are you studying, et cetera, et cetera. And I'd say, oh, I went here and I'm interested in politics and so on. And I thought, wow, I can have conversations with these people. And, a man who used to employ me on the doors, he said something to me. He said, you could do anything you want. And I sort of thought, wow, like that's the first time I think an adult person, other in the context of fighting, had actually said you could do anything you want to do.
Wonderful. It's amazing how these people really stand out, aren't they? The ones that are like, the gold nuggets that you find through the wreckage, the
Yeah.
dirt, really, that you were faced with so much. There were some of those gold nuggets, like that teacher who taught you to read, and the coach that made you feel respected, and the people, and being in that environment must have been like just getting fresh water after being in the desert for so long. It must have been so wonderful. And I love the fact that we call it a bounce moment, when something happens, almost like that, the ball drops, gets low, and then comes back up. And I love the fact that you were a bouncer when you had that
Mm.
moment and you thought, actually, I want to be on the other side of that rope. And what did you do to get to the other side of the rope?
Yeah. So I'd actually applied to undertake an access course, so at Leicester College, and it was exciting because it didn't seem to require qualifications, because it was for mature students, and it was the equivalent of A levels in 1 year, and the pathway was history, English, and sociology, and I was interested in those things, and I applied. And here's the truth: I received a letter, and it had said that I was rejected, and it had suggested that I apply for a foundation year. And maybe that was reasonable, but I didn't take it as such, because, education had really failed me. And I'd been in situations before where I'd wanted to engage in things at school, whether it was clubs, whether it was, different lessons and so on, or going back to mainstream when I was at my referral unit. And I'd always had this kind of no, but perhaps you can do this. No. And it was another one of those doors being closed in my face. And I had a very kind of visceral reaction, in this moment you describe as a bounce moment. And it comes back to, I guess, what we've been talking about. I felt affronted and I felt like it wasn't fair. And I felt like where I didn't feel like it saw me for who I was. And I thought, I'm not having that. If they're going to reject me, they're going to reject me to my face. So that's when I said that no, I'm going to put a suit on and I'm going to go down to the college and I'm going to have a chat with, who's in charge. And I did. And, to her credit, she, the first person in education, and I really mean that, other than the lady who taught me to read, but the first person with any power in education to actually give me, a real shot at something, was this woman. And she said, you can have an unconditional offer. Doesn't matter that you haven't got GCSEs, and I'll see you in the summer. And, that was amazing. It was
Yeah.
amazing because, you know, I was in, I was accepted, I
Yeah.
was included. It's the first educational institution that wanted me,
And how old were
um,
you?
24, 24,
24
um,
years. Yeah.
24. Because I'd eyed this up when I was 23, but I had to wait because you couldn't get the advanced learner loan to do the course until 24. And I was in, and that was just, yeah, it was so exciting. And it was like it was like, oh, I can start fresh with this now. So
Was that
yeah,
a moment of pride for you? Did you
yeah,
feel
it was
pride during
actually.
your education?
Yeah, I remember leaving there and I remember feeling really excited, but I remember feeling resolved and really quite loyal. I said, look, I've got between now and, summer, I can, try and get a qualification or I can do this. I really want to do it. I've got the time, I only work in the evenings, these kind of things. But she didn't ask me for anything of that. I think she just took that as the resolve that she wanted to
Hmm.
hear. So I just wanted to put in a good showing. And it's funny because when I started, and this will probably come on to the stuff we talk about at university, when I started, I didn't know the playbook really for learning at this level because it never happened. It was pretty much primary school and then referral unit where no learning took place. So I would sit there, but I was so engaged and, and I'd answer the questions, but I didn't take any notes. And I remember that the woman who taught history was concerned about that. But when I wrote my first essay, I'll never forget the feedback was, I'm no longer concerned that you don't take notes. So, but she was thrilled and she was a big advocate for me. And, when I sat down, because the scary thing was is that you had to apply to university quite quickly. So here I am with the only qualification I have is a doorman's badge. I think my first aid had run out at that point. And they're saying, you've got to apply. We start in September. You've got to apply for university in October. And I thought, what have I got to say about myself? But I was really proud of my personal statement. And that's another thing, because I did acknowledge my challenges. And every university I applied to did give me an offer, which was great. But, I was I sort of tentatively asked, rather nervously, do you think I could apply to such and such a university? Well, it was York, actually. I really wanted to go to York because I like York City. And, the tutor said, yeah, you can apply to any university you want. You really can. And I was like, wow, and that really broadened my horizons. And eventually I got into York, but I chose to go to Warwick. But yeah, it was a great year.
What made you choose Warwick?
There's no glamorous answer for this. I mean, my father was dying of cancer and he lived in
Oh,
Northampton. I suppose the more glamorous answer to that is that he did say to me one thing that always stuck with me. He said, son, you've got no right to listen to me about anything, which was good because he acknowledged his failings as a father, because we reconnected later in life when he got cancer. So about the time I went to college, we reconnected. And he says, but the one thing I do know about Son is education, which he did because that was his job for the local authority in Northampton. He worked with schools, he'd got a degree, he did care about education. And he said, choose Warwick, son.
oh. And you graduated from Warwick.
Yeah, I got a first class. I got a first class degree, which was,
Amazing,
yeah,
incredible.
it was. I mean, and my dad died in the second year of my degree,
Wow.
which was really challenging. But I knew kind of, he valued it, and I just wanted to make an absolute success of it. I just wanted to do the best I could, and I'd conceived of this plan, which is probably why I'm here now. I'd conceived of this plan where I had such a good time at college, and I thought, and I was really making sense of the exclusion and how it affected my life and how it was wrong, and looking at where some of my peers had gone, and knowing that some of my peers were smarter than me and more talented than me as well, but they hadn't had the opportunity. And I thought, I'd really like to see some change in this area. So at Warwick, I'd done a research project into school exclusion, and I'd come up with a whole policy recommendation, and I'd been to pupil referral units in Corby and in my old area in Northampton, and done surveys and so on. And I thought, I really want to be on this issue because it seems like nobody else is. And I would always search for anyone else, permanently excluded from school, been to university. And it was always really hard to find. And I thought, I want to go to Oxford. I want to go Oxford or Cambridge. I want to go to the top, and I want to say, look, we can do this. So that's when I kind of concocted this plan, and I'm going to go to a master's degree, and then I'm going to finish up at Oxbridge, and it worked, and I kind of got through the door, and it's been great because then that's enabled me to be a voice for young people excluded from school, to say, don't write them off because this is what they can achieve. And nothing magical happened between me getting excluded and me going to college. I had no therapy. I had no relationship. I had nothing happen to me. I had no rekindling of relationship with my parents. But suddenly I was okay with doing it at 24 despite no intervention, but I wasn't okay with doing it at 14. So, I think when you look at that, actually it was the way that I was treated, and it was the fact that I was given an opportunity and that somebody believed in me. So I thought, I want to change the narrative, change the conversation on that. So that was when I concocted the plan, and I pushed through, and I had to work really hard to get there, and I got to Oxford, and now I'm able to kind of talk about this issue.
Absolutely. In between times, you did a master's at St Andrews, is it?
Yeah.
And then got to Oxford. Want to know how Tier's plan is going? Tune in for episode 5 when we learn how he's implementing his plan to change the narrative, and how he overcame personally his own imposter phenomenon as a student from an underprivileged background, looking for acceptance in some of the world's most prestigious universities. I look forward to you joining me then. Thank you for listening to the Bounce Mindset podcast. If you would like a coach in your pocket with free regular hints and tips to help you bounce forward in your career or personal life, then please feel free to go to the Bounce Mindset podcast show notes. And don't forget to leave a review for us. Thank you. Bye.